Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ray, and I just finished doing my second year of physics here at Cambridge, and in the summer of 2019, I achieved 4 stars at A-level. Now, I largely attribute this to being able to do past papers to practice applying all the content I was learning, and also memorizing all the content using flashcards. Now, before you click off the video thinking that flashcards don't really work for you, stick with me here because I will explain what a good flashcard is and what you are using probably weren't even flashcards to begin with, and just like some dodgy revision cards. Anyways, timestamps will be in the description down below, so do check those out during the video. Now, most people when they think of flashcards is that you just have like a sheet of paper or some card of paper, and you write the name of one topic on one side. So let's say you write electrolysis on one side, and then on the other side you just write like a bunch of stuff, or basically everything you know to do with electrolysis. And the idea that people have in their head is that when they're just like going through these flashcards, well, so-called flashcards that is, they just look at the front side, they think about electrolysis for like a few seconds, and then they flip over to the backside and read the backside. Or they just may not have anything written on the backside, on the front side at all, and they would just like have the backside and just flip through the cards, just passively rereading them. Which is no different from just rereading your class notes or rereading a textbook. The only difference is like it's just in a different form and it's just easier to carry around. Now, these are really bad flashcards, and I don't even call them flashcards, I call them like cue cards or something, like the TV presenters with cue cards. And this is not entirely what I mean when I think about flashcards. A more effective flashcard always has a question on one side, and usually one fact or concept on the other side, rather than having reams of like sentences and text about everything to do with that topic. It focuses on one specific concept or one specific question, rather than say the whole topic of electrolysis. So I will be showing some examples of good flashcards later in the video, but for now I want to speak out why you should be using flashcards, and that comes down to two key principles: active recall and spaced repetition. Now, these are the two most powerful learning techniques as determined by educational psychology after, say, hundreds of papers. Like literally there are hundreds of papers written about this and showing that these are the most two effective ways to learn material. Now, active recall in short is making a conscious effort to actively retrieve information from your brain, as opposed to like passively rereading material on another side of these cue cards. And this is the most important thing that's lacking for people when they're just skipping through a deck of cue cards or what they think are flashcards, and that's probably why they don't think it works for them. Because the more times you try to actively retrieve some kind of information from your brain, the more likely you are to remember it in the longer term, because the synapse connections between those parts of your brain like strengthen, and the like signals travel faster between these connections and stuff. So like over time you just gradually begin to recall the information much faster, which is really good for the exam because you want to be recalling the information as fast as possible rather than having to spend about a minute or two trying to think back to the lesson every time you start a new question. So meanwhile, spaced repetition is based on the forgetting curve, which dictates how much of your retention of something changes over time after first learning the material. So gradually it decreases over time quite quickly, and then if you review the material at just the right moment, then it will jump back up to like a high retention, and then the rate at which it decreases will slow down, and each time you review the information and it jumps back up, the rate decreases even further, such that you have to be reviewing the information less often to like remember it for basically just as well. Now, by spacing out your reviews well, you can basically achieve the same grades, if not better, but with a fraction of the time involved, because you're reviewing the information as least often as it needs to be reviewed. So for example, if you review some piece of information, then you may have to review it like a day later, and if you get it right, then maybe 3 days later, and if you get it right again, then like 7 days later, then like about maybe 15 days later, and then maybe even 30 days later. And the time interval between reviews gradually increases each time you get the information right, which is what spaced repetition is kind of all about. Now, if I did make some effective paper flashcards with like a question on one side and then like some concept or some diagrams or like facts on the other side, then that would be all well and good, and I could be going through the flashcards and using active recall to actively retrieve the information from my brain and strengthen those synapse connections. But it's really difficult to incorporate spaced repetition with each of the flashcards, because you may be getting some flashcards right and other flashcards wrong, and then you'd sort of have to separate them out and like come back to the ones that you're doing wrong more often and come back to the ones you're getting right less often, which can become quite cumbersome if you're using paper. So I would highly recommend using digital flashcards because they have like algorithms which basically decide that whole for you. And now later in the video I will be talking about in my digital flashcard app of choice, but a few more reasons why you should be using digital flashcards is because they're much easier to make, because you can add new information, correct mistakes on the go much more easily. You can go on Google Images and like find a few images rather than having to draw diagrams yourself. And basically, yeah, they're just vastly easier to make. And also with digital flashcards, because you can study on your phone, you can also study in short bursts. So you can study during like 5 minutes when you're free, like commuting to school or waiting in a queue or something, or like even 5 minutes when you're like waiting for dinner to be ready or something. And basically all these small intervals add up throughout the day, and by the end of the day, like you've done a whole hour of flashcards, but you haven't even realized it. And because it's on your phone, you can be sort of lying back on the couch, or you can be lying in bed and then going through flashcards on your phone, without having to like be hunched over at a desk with like most normal revision. Now there are a bunch more reasons why digital flashcards are better, but trust me, I've been doing this for like 4 or 5 years and like they are really good. And one of the best parts is, say that if you made flashcards for the whole of chemistry, then you don't really need a study timetable of deciding when to come back to certain topics, because the flashcard app decides it for you based on which flashcards you were getting right and which ones you were getting wrong. And then you'll sort of notice trends in which ones you were getting wrong, and you can either like correct those mistakes or like go back and understand that material or something. So it basically tells you what you should be coming back to more often and every day. So now my digital flashcard app of choice is Anki, but I won't be explaining how to use it in this video because I already have a video on how you can learn to use Anki in under 15 minutes. And I think it's the best flashcard app because it has the most amounts of features, it's most powerful, you can download tons of plugins and stuff to like enhance your flashcards. It has spaced repetition built in and for free, unlike Quizlet, which I think has active recall because it has flashcards, but you have to pay to use spaced repetition, which isn't great. And basically Anki is fantastic. So you can see here I have 4 main decks, one for each of my A-level subjects, and then some sub-decks in between, as in like chemistry and further maths. Now you can see if I have all these flashcards due, like hundreds due, because I haven't been over my A-level flashcards for like 2 years now. But if I go to one of these decks, say like the Foundations of Chemistry deck, and I press study now, then you can see some of these flashcards come up. So like define both cation and anion. So if I define like, okay, cation is a positively charged ion and an anion is negatively charged, and then press show answer, then you can see like I have the answer or the fact on the other side, which is like just a simple statement. And then I have a little mnemonic at the bottom, like remember as cats make you positive, which works for me personally because like cats are nice. But if they're not for you then and they make you feel negative, then this flashcard unfortunately doesn't work for you, or mnemonic. So anyway, you can see I have 4 buttons on the bottom. Again, if I got it wrong, if it was hard to remember, then I'd come back in less than 10 minutes. If it was quite easy to remember, then I'd press good and I'd come back in a day. And if it was like basically trivial to remember, I can press easy and I come back in 4 days. So I can either press 1, 2, 3, or 4 respectively. And if I press 4, then that's going to come back to me in 4 days. Now another flashcard, what is the relative atomic mass of a proton, neutron, and electron? So it's like 1,1,1/1836, and if I press show answer, then that comes up, and I can either do the same thing. So let's say that was pretty hard for me to remember. I just press hard, and then it come back to me in 10 minutes. And define isotopes, then I also have this fact on the other side, and I bolded some words, which are the words that the exam board really wants to see. Like they want to see same element, but different number of neutrons. And when I'm recalling this flashcard, because this is a definition, I basically have to recall the words in bold. And when I'm recalling a concept, so if I try to find a concept right now, so I had quite a few concept-based flashcards in further maths. So if I can come back to further maths, then I can see how is the diagonalization of a matrix useful with like a derivation. Like that's sort of a loose concept I have in my head, which I explain to myself, and they're not going to be testing me on this precisely, but you sort of get the idea. Like these flashcards are either based on like one particular fact or one particular concept. But I also have a much more comprehensive video on how you can be using Anki for A-levels, and how you can like tag flashcards and then like split flashcards up in custom study decks and review ahead and like use a bunch of the neat features, which is all in a using Anki video linked above somewhere right now. So do check that out as well after you've learned to use Anki to begin with. So as for making flashcards themselves, I sort of had a process by which I went through my class notes, and then I went through some other material online, and then I like combined this all into flashcards. So I also have a video up on that, which is called Learning New Content, which you should check out as well. And hopefully that gives you an idea of how you should go about making these flashcards to begin with, and making them effective too. But when you're first introduced to the idea of flashcards, it can be quite easy to just end up making flashcards about everything and every single like fact or concept. And like when you're working for a textbook or a CGP revision guide or something like that, you end up making 20, 30 flashcards all on one page, and then you have like dozens of more pages, and by the end of it you may end up with like over 1,000 flashcards just for one subject. Now, this is like quite a bad thing that you can end up doing because you end up with way too many flashcards. So there are a few things to keep in mind. You want to have closely linked information all on one flashcard. So try to remember either one fact/definition or one concept per flashcard. So you can put like multiple amounts of information on one flashcard. Say for like a reaction, you can have like the diagram for the reaction, you can have some equations, you can have the reagents, you can have the conditions. All on one flashcard. They don't have to be split across many different flashcards. So to give you an idea, if I go back to Anki and press browse, and I go to my chemistry deck, you can see in 2 years of A-level chemistry, I made about 558 flashcards. In 2 years of A-level physics, I made 490 flashcards. Maths, 2 years of maths, I made 50 flashcards, and 2 years of further maths, I made 250 flashcards. So like, if you're doing A-level chemistry and within the first 2 months you've already made like 600 flashcards, then you're probably doing something a bit wrong, because I made 560 flashcards in 2 years. So do keep that in mind when making them. Just don't make flashcards on literally everything, and don't make flashcards on obvious things either, because there's no point making a flashcard on like what is the relative charge of an electron and writing like a -1 on the other side, because like you're doing A-level chemistry and that information should just sort of be obvious at that point. Or if information slowly begins to become obvious because it's like one of the foundations, then I would just end up deleting flashcards like a few months later, because I'm like, this information is just obvious, I use it all the time. Especially when it comes to maths and say like differentiation, I don't have to make a flashcard on like, okay, you should like pull the power down and then reduce it by 1 or something, because you just end up doing that so much that you just don't need a flashcard on it. So as for going through flashcards themselves, I would mention a few points here. So when going through flashcards on Anki, say on your computer or your phone, when you sync it to your phone, actively try to engage with the flashcard, because remember that the more effort you put into recalling what's on the other side of the flashcard, the more those synapse connections will strengthen when you are able to recall the material. So don't worry if it's taking you like 20-30 seconds to recall the material, because if you are able to recall it after 20-30 seconds, then those connections are made much stronger as a result. So don't give up on recalling flashcards after like 5 seconds. But then again, if you generally can't remember the other side, then just flip over and try to think about why you couldn't remember it. Maybe it's like poorly worded, or you don't understand the material as well as you thought. And do speak out loud as much as possible. So when I was on my commute to school doing flashcards, then I would kind of like whisper the flashcards, like the answers under my breath, or I would just sort of move my lips, or like when I was in my room, I would actually say the answers out loud rather than saying it in my head, because it can be quite tempting to just end up marking a flashcard as right, and because you sort of had a loose idea of what the answer was in your head, and then you're just like, oh, well, that was right anyway. And it depends on how strict you want to be as well. So for definitions, I was usually pretty strict on myself, and I had to get like the definition close to word for word, but for concepts, I could sort of loosely explain the concept to myself, and as long as like there was a major flaw in my misunderstanding on the concept, I would just mark as right. Anyways, you can watch more of my video about using Anki for A-levels, which is linked in the description down below, so do check that out. But I would want to emphasize a few points finally. Focus on understanding rather than just making flashcards and everything, because first you should understand a piece of information before making flashcards on it. Otherwise, you'll just be memorizing that information and you'll find it really difficult to apply to exam questions if you don't actually understand it. And secondly, flashcards aren't a replacement for like basically everything else. You still have to be doing past papers to practice applying the knowledge and exam questions and topic tests and stuff like that. Flashcards are just useful for helping you remember the information, which you can then apply in those tests, and you can retrieve the information from your brain much more easily and complete the test faster. They're not basically the replacement for all sorts of revision. In the end, for me, flashcards and doing past papers and exam questions made up about 95% of the revision I was doing. Now, if you want to learn a bunch more about like studying effectively, then I do have a Studying Effectively playlist, which is also linked down in the description and above somewhere right now. So do check that out. But I guess I'll see you next time for now. Bye!